again. This is Danielle Weinblatt with another episode of Hiring on All Cylinders. Today, I'm excited to be joined by one of Entelo's Customer Advisory Board members, Mode Analytics Senior Director of People Operations, Bailey Douglas. Welcome, Bailey. Thank you for joining me today.
I'm happy to be here.
It's awesome. I'm happy to have you. So Bailey, you've been a tech recruiter, recruiting manager, and director of talent before moving into your current role as senior director of people operations. Can you tell me a little bit about your transition to people operations and what your role oversees at Mode?
Yeah, so I've been at Mode for almost 5 years now, actually, and it's kind of been an interesting journey there. Off the bat, I will say, prior to being a recruiter, I have had a lot of exposure. I did have a lot of exposure previously to people ops and operations in general, because I started my career in finance and kind of came into recruiting through a chief of staff type role. So it's not as sort of big a leap as it might seem, kind of going from recruiting into more of a people ops role. But yeah, when I joined Mode, I think with many small companies, the sort of initial people operations functions are, having an office manager essentially, but sort of like making sure that the company is functioning on like the more basic levels, that, the bills are getting paid, things like that. And then recruiting, that's more on the sort of strategic talent acquisition side. So I was still managing things like compensation when I joined, and recruiting and HR were just separate fully, which is actually what I would recommend for most companies that are at an early stage. With Mode, as I've grown, we have a really values-driven culture, and that sort of stems from our recruiting process. And it became clear that really that employee experience is end-to-end, from sort of that initial interaction with a recruiter, with a member of the recruiting team, with a hiring manager, whoever it is, all the way to, an employee becoming an alum and looking into next steps. And with that, you want to have a more strategic people operations function that's sort of in line with the way that we had built recruiting at Mode. So, with that, our CEO asked me to step into more of the people operations side of things. And I've been doing that at Mode for, I think, a little bit over 2 years now, actually. So that's been great. One of the things that's really nice about Mode is that as a talent leader and now as a people operations person, I am able to sit on the executive team and I have a seat at the table. So we really do consider people operations to be a strategic function. And my team right now encompasses our recruiting team, and then also employee experience, which is IT, facilities, EAs, and then also people operations. So I have a people ops business partner reporting to me as well. So lots of different parts of the org kind of covered in people ops at Mode.
Yeah, that sounds great. Really all encompassing. So what would you say is the most challenging part of your role?
I think there's a lot of things that are coming across my plate and my team's plate on a regular basis. A lot of things that could all sort of take up a full day in terms of, a project, a response to an issue, things like that, and prioritization, and making sure that what we're doing are the things that are helping us to keep Mode kind of working on achieving our goals and getting us to the place that we need to be as a business is the most challenging thing. There's a lot of, I think in HR in particular, sort of like, let's let great be the enemy of good, because it's such a leverage role that affects so many people. Sometimes I think there can be kind of a fear of shipping anything because you want it to be perfect. And what I've learned in this job is that, doing the best that you can, making trade-offs and being able to explain why you've made those trade-offs, and kind of continuing to focus on that North Star and make sure that what we're doing is the most leveraged stuff is pretty challenging. And that's where we'll see ourselves trying to improve.
That sounds awesome. So many organizations are having to navigate a new normal with work from home and virtual processes. With business and employee needs changing daily, how is Mode handling these changes and making decisions to help ensure the company is successful?
Yeah, so there's a few questions in there. I think just off the bat, in terms of sort of the logistics of transitioning to remote work, we were in a pretty good position. We were already 16% remote. And the main thing there that you'll see on just sort of like a tactical perspective is making documentation and efficiency even more important, defaulting to have a conversation over Zoom if things get contentious or confusing, and then kind of thinking about ways to build togetherness as a team in times of this isolation. So, team building events, things like that. Unfortunately, right now, we're in a position where everything is happening over Zoom, which is not ideal, frankly, for that. But we've sort of worked on a variety of ways for us to either consume content and talk about it in ways that are either synchronous or asynchronous, depending on what people want. And also some more just sort of like team togetherness activities where we're all talking about the same thing or doing the same thing together. Beyond that, I think there's actually a much bigger issue here, which is that we're in a time where not only are employees working remotely, they're undergoing stress that's really different than I think they would have had a month ago, a week ago, even. People have loved ones who are sick. People are, worried about people that they care about who have lost their jobs. We're really in a position where our employees there's people who have children at home now that they're providing care for, in addition to fulfilling their job responsibilities, and being flexible so that we're supporting those employees while still making sure that they know what it is that they need to do to be successful is actually one of the bigger challenges. So with that, what I've sort of tried to do with our managers is figure out what everyone's situation is, let them know how we can accommodate them by asking them, what they need, and figuring out, is it that your hours need to be offset in some kind of way? Do you need to work in the morning and the evenings and have a gap in the afternoon? Like, what is it going to be that's going to help you manage your life in this way? And how can we communicate that to the team, and how can we support you there? With that, I think it's also really important. There's a lot of temptation to just sort of cut everyone a lot of slack right now and be really lax in general. And I actually don't think that reduces stress for the employee or is beneficial to the company. I think making sure people know what it is that we need them to do to be successful, and like how we define success so that they're able to know where they stand on a continued basis actually reduces stress for people in a time like this, because otherwise there's sort of like a guessing game you're playing with your manager where you're trying to know, hey, I said I needed some time to do this stuff. Like, is it okay for these deadlines to slip? Maybe it is in some positions, and sometimes it is. In some situations, the thing that you're asking for is different than what you were asking for before, but in sometimes it's not. And if you don't know where you stand, it just increases the level of anxiety. So yeah, we're trying to think about that as well, but it's definitely uncharted territory, and we're thinking about these challenges sort of differently as we grow.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about the fact that, the roles of employees need to be further clarified. How do you communicate in a time like this? Like, how different does communication need to be? And what would you advise managers and employees to be doing differently in a work from home world?
Yeah, so in terms of the sort of communication explicitly, I think it depends on a lot of things, how senior the people in your team are, what they're going through and their challenges. And I think being flexible and sort of thinking about where someone is one of the things that's most helpful here. For the recruiting team and the people ops team, since it's a large team, we've split them into two separate groups for this purpose, but we're doing stand-ups every morning, which is something I never would have done before. I think in an office setting, it comes across as a little bit micromanagey, but right now it's really helpful where everyone is saying, this is what I'm going to work on today. This is how I will know I have been successful today. And we see each other's faces, we get that community moment. And then we also have the opportunity to sort of have the manager say, yeah, that sounds right. You're going in the right direction. Or sometimes it is, like, especially for people ops, sometimes it's like, hey, I know I said this was really important yesterday. Today, we've actually changed the priorities completely, and I need you to do this instead. But making sure people are on track and at least from that one touch, what's happening. For some of our more senior teams and people, we're doing a little less of that. I also think that in terms of expectations, we use Lattice for performance management and one-on-ones, and making sure that in those one-on-ones and lattice, goals are clearly set, that people know what's happening there, and that there's somewhere they can go back to see what we agreed on really matters. When people are emotional, there's a lot of like brain science that supports this. When people are emotional or triggered, they're much less likely to absorb information correctly the first time. And, people say, I think conventional wisdom is that things have to be repeated 6 times for someone to absorb that message a lot of the time. Being able to have a place where the employees can go back and say, hey, what do I owe? Like, what is the thing for me to get in here? Has been really helpful too. So having that agreement conversation and then documenting the agreement in a place where the employee can reach back out to it. And I think it's really important to normalize that as how you do it things all the time. That's not just for people who are having challenges. And in fact, we've found that for high performers, the sort of more clear goal definition and like check-ins on those points are satisfying for them because they know where they stand. They see compensation increases attached to it, which you've got to, everyone likes that. And they understand sort of where they are in relative to what their goals are.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think you make some really valid points there. And the stand-ups are something, obviously, dev teams, product teams have been using for a while. It's part of the agile methodology, but it's interesting that you're doing it now across the company. Are there other things that you think can lead to better productivity and efficiency during this time?
I think I already talked a little bit about being flexible and letting people do their work when they need to be. I think there's also, if you do that, you need to understand that you're agreeing to have asynchronous communication, which is less efficient, and that's a trade-off you're making. And asynchronous communication usually needs to just be more detailed. It needs to be over-explained, things like that. Again, I think the second that like back and forth gets confusing or contentious or anything, we have the Zoom integration installed in our Slack, and like /Zoom is, I've probably done /Zoom 8 times today and it's noon. So I'm constantly defaulting to like have that face-to-face and really sort of not leaning on that. We have an expectation for our team members that they are like in a place where they're able to do video chat while they're working remotely. That's an expectation that we've had, prior to this situation as well. We've always had a pretty flexible team, and we have 16% remote already. But yeah, I don't know if that's a great answer, but that's sort of a big piece of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So what percentage of your calls now do you think with this work from home situation are now over video versus like a typical conference call?
I would say that if people aren't having technical challenges, we've tried to do 100% over video. I think you get a lot, especially in terms of HR and manager, direct report kind of interactions, from seeing someone's body language, seeing how they respond to something. People might say, okay, yeah, but you can see like they're furrowing their brow. They don't like this. You can find out a lot of information from that, like especially with more junior people, if they're hearing an idea that they don't agree with, for example, they may not feel as empowered to just say so immediately. But if as a manager, I see that someone's like having a reaction to something I'm saying, I can find out more about that. And I might learn something that's really valuable in terms of, maybe the idea we're talking about isn't that good an idea. Maybe there's a reason this individual isn't liking it, things like that. Video communication is really important for us. And it's kind of been a pillar here. It's tiring. I can't pretend that I love being on Zoom all day long. And my family wanted to do a Zoom this weekend where we all looked at each other, and it really sounded like work to me. I did participate, but I was not into it. But I think the trade-off is worth it. I think that having that face-to-face connection, especially when you're talking about any issue that might be contentious, just helps remind us that we're all people and helps us communicate much more clearly.
Yeah, I think it's great. So what are your thoughts about the long-term effects of the pandemic as it relates to recruiting? Do you have any predictions or processes that you're looking at that might need to be addressed as we move forward?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. One, the biggest thing that I would say is that companies in the future are going to be held accountable for how they treat people during this time. I think this is a temporary situation. I don't know how long, the economic downturn will last and things associated with that, but this is not going to be how the world is forever. And at some point, talent is going to be extremely competitive again, just like it has been. And people will remember what companies did for their people who are affected during this time. And I hope that every employer is thinking about how they're communicating with their team and how they are taking care of people who they are laying off or, furloughing or making other decisions like that. I think that is incredibly important and something that people should be remembering. Beyond that, I think that there's a few sort of more tactical changes. I think remote is going to be much more accepted in terms of the labor market. Right now, I know a lot of companies are offering remote jobs at a bit of a discount to in-office work, especially in markets like New York and San Francisco. I think it'll be interesting to see how that changes. My expectation is that compensation will probably flatten out a bit in San Francisco and New York as people see that they don't need someone based in those markets. And so potentially, especially for a lot of roles, compensation will lower a little bit overall, at least in terms of cash. But the remote people won't be at a discount anymore. That's a guess that I have. Obviously, I'm not an economist, but this is sort of what I'm starting to see. I also think that there are going to be a lot of people who thought that they wanted remote work who have realized that actually it's not for them. I've heard a lot of people, in interview processes, we hear candidates asking to work remotely quite a lot. And there definitely are some people on the team right now who had initially agitated to be remote who are not enjoying this experience whatsoever and have said that they really miss the office and want to go back in. So I think in some conditions from like an employee experience perspective, having a great office is going to be a huge competitive advantage, even potentially more so where you saw people working for remote work before. So I think the market's going to be more open to remote work. I think that the job seekers might not have as much of an appetite for it. And then beyond that, I think in the short term, capacity models will probably change pretty significantly. In a market where there's more talent available, inbound is going to increase. Products to work on, getting through your database and your inbound and figuring out who to respond to are going to matter a lot more than outbound sourcing in everything but the hardest to fill most technical roles. I think that, it may be that fewer recruiters will be required to fill the same number of roles, especially at companies that are doing sort of like more of like a volume approach, where you're hiring a lot of salespeople who are all doing the same job or things like that. So I think this is going to be a really big change in general. And I think that the companies who are able to figure out how to adapt to that in a thoughtful way and make their systems work for the new environment are going to be the most successful.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of your predictions there. Any final words of advice for the talent acquisition community as we work together to get through this crisis?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough time. We all need to be creative about how we think about solving the problems that we're facing right now. Having empathy for each other, having empathy for candidates in the process, remembering that, we are all humans and we need to be flexible with each other and with the way that we're conducting interviews, the way that we're thinking about filling roles, the way that we're looking at all of this stuff is really important. Not like a month ago, an onsite would have to be scheduled all in a row because the candidate's coming on site once. Now maybe it's better for a candidate to meet with you over the course of a few days because of their childcare situation. Like, we should be flexible about that. We should remember the people that we're facing that are on the other side of this are facing many of the same kinds of challenges that all of us are. Beyond that, I think it's really important for recruiters to identify clearly and demonstrate the value that they have as business partners and advisors since the market is changing. I think for someone who's a little less sophisticated about the value of talent acquisition, looking at a recruiter as just like a sourcing machine, you might think that you don't need recruiting teams as much. Recruiters are much more than that. Recruiters are helping to identify what kind of talent we need. They're really valuable in terms of thinking about how we assess talent, and they are a crucial part of hiring in general. And the best recruiters and the ones who are most successful are going to be the ones who continue to demonstrate their value in that way and truly are partners with the teams. in the short term, I think people will be laid off right now, especially recruiters out in a lot of companies. I've already heard of it quite a bit. To those people, I would say good recruiters have a ton of skills that are useful in a really wide array of roles. Your SDRs, salespeople, business strategists, marketers, you're doing all of these different jobs as a recruiter. And there's a lot of different ways of marketing yourself into a recession where you can take those skills that you have and position yourself for the long-term career that you're looking for. So I think, in terms of being nimble and adaptable and able to figure out how to thrive in this market, recruiters are really actually uniquely positioned. So, I think that things will get better. I know this is a really hard time, and I think it's going to take really industrious, creative people to figure out how to get us there. But I hope everyone's being gentle with themselves and focusing on controlling what we can control.
Yeah. What great advice for everybody out there. Thank you so much. We definitely appreciate you taking the time today. It was just such a wealth of experience to share with everyone. So definitely thank you again.
Thank you. This was really fun.